The rain came down in heavy sheets that Thursday night, turning the city streets into rivers of neon reflections. Marcus Chen stood beneath the flickering awning of the Sapphire Lounge, his small frame barely reaching the doorman's chest as he nodded good night. At 3 feet 9 inches tall, Marcus had grown accustomed to living in a world built for others, but he'd never let his stature define his spirit. His shift as the lounge's night manager had been long, and his feet ached in his specially fitted shoes. All he wanted was to get home to his daughter, Emma, who was sleeping peacefully at his sister's apartment across town. The thought of her gap-toothed smile was enough to push him through the exhaustion that settled into his bones. He was about to step into the rain when he heard it, a commotion from the alley beside the lounge. Raised voices, the sound of something crashing, then laughter that sent chills down his spine. Every instinct told him to walk away, to mind his own business. But Marcus had never been good at ignoring people in trouble. He peered around the corner into the dimly lit alley. 3 men surrounded someone slumped against the brick wall. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, Marcus's heart sank. It was Richard Ashford, the CEO of Ashford Industries, one of the lounge's regular patrons. The man who always tipped generously, who remembered Marcus's name, who'd once asked to see pictures of Emma and genuinely smiled at every single one. Richard was clearly intoxicated, barely able to hold his head up, while the 3 men rifled through his pockets. One of them yanked the expensive watch from Richard's wrist. "Hey!" Marcus's voice came out stronger than he felt. "Leave him alone!" The men turned, and for a moment, they just stared. Then they laughed, harsh, cruel laughter that Marcus had heard too many times in his life. "What are you going to do about it, little man?" The tallest one sneered, taking a step toward Marcus. Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears. He wasn't a fighter. He'd never thrown a punch in his life. But he thought of Emma, of the values he was trying to teach her, of the man he wanted to be in her eyes. He pulled out his phone, holding it up with shaking hands. "The police are already on their way," he lied, his voice steady despite his terror. "And this whole alley is covered by the lounge's security cameras." It was a bluff. The cameras didn't extend to the alley, but the men didn't know that. They exchanged glances, uncertainty flickering across their faces. The tall one spat on the ground near Marcus's feet, but backed away. "He ain't worth the trouble anyway," one of them muttered, and they disappeared into the rain, leaving Richard's watch on the ground. Marcus rushed to Richard's side. The man reeked of whiskey and expensive cologne, his usually crisp suit rumpled and stained. His eyes struggled to focus on Marcus's face. "Mr. Ashford? Richard? Can you hear me?" Richard mumbled something incoherent, his head lolling forward. Marcus knew he couldn't leave him here, but getting a man 3 times his size to safety was going to be nearly impossible. Still, he had to try. For the next 45 minutes, Marcus half-carried, half-dragged Richard through the rain. He called for a taxi, but none would stop when they saw the situation. His back screamed in protest, his arms burned, but he kept going. He used Richard's phone, thankfully unlocked, to find his address, then somehow managed to get them both into an Uber, the driver grumbling the entire way. Richard's penthouse apartment was everything Marcus expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that probably cost more than Marcus made in a year, art that belonged in museums. He got Richard onto the leather couch, removed his shoes, and found a blanket to cover him. He left water and aspirin on the coffee table, along with a note that simply read, "Feel better. The lounge cameras caught what happened. Your belongings are safe. Marcus." Then he called another Uber and made the long journey home, arriving just as dawn painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. He paid his sister, scooped up a sleeping Emma, and carried her to their small apartment 3 blocks away. As he tucked her into her bed, watching her chest rise and fall in peaceful sleep, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of the night's events. He didn't expect anything to come from it. He'd done what any decent person would do. Nothing more. Richard probably wouldn't even remember, but Marcus was wrong. 3 days later, a letter arrived at the Sapphire Lounge, delivered by a woman in an expensive suit who asked specifically for Marcus Chen. Inside was a handwritten note on embossed stationery. Marcus, I don't remember much from that night, but I remember your voice, your kindness, and waking up safe because of you. I need to thank you properly. Please come to my office tomorrow at 2 p.m. The address is enclosed. Richard Ashford. Marcus stared at the note for a long time. Part of him wanted to throw it away, to pretend it never happened. He didn't save Richard for a reward. But another part of him, the part that lay awake at night worrying about Emma's future, about medical bills and rent and the shoes she'd need when she outgrew her current pair, convinced him to go. Ashford Industries occupied the top 15 floors of one of the city's most prestigious buildings. As Marcus entered the lobby, he felt every eye turned toward him. The security guard's gaze lingered a moment too long. The woman at the reception desk spoke to him slowly, as if his size meant he might not understand words. But Richard's assistant, a kind-faced woman named Patricia, greeted him warmly and escorted him to the executive floor. When the elevator doors opened, Marcus stepped into a world of glass and steel and quiet efficiency. Richard's office was enormous, with windows that seemed to capture the entire sky. The man himself stood when Marcus entered, and his eyes were clear and filled with something Marcus couldn't quite name. Shame, perhaps, or gratitude. Marcus. Richard crossed the room in 3 long strides and extended his hand. Marcus shook it, noting the firm grip, the genuine warmth. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. They sat across from each other, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Richard leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes meeting Marcus's without hesitation. I've been sober for 3 years, Richard began, his voice quiet. 3 years without a drop. That night was my first relapse. My wife, my ex-wife now, she'd just remarried. The papers came through that morning. I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. He paused, running a hand through his hair. I put myself in danger. I put you in danger. And you helped me anyway. Do you know how rare that is? How many people would have walked past? Marcus shifted in his seat. I just did what anyone should do. But they don't, Richard said softly. That's the point. They don't. He stood, walking to the window. I want to do something for you, Marcus. I want to help you the way you helped me. That's not necessary. Please. Richard turned back. Let me do this. What do you need? What can I do? Marcus thought of Emma, of her dreams of becoming a doctor, of the books she devoured from the library because he couldn't afford to buy them, of the way she never complained when other kids got new toys and she got hand-me-downs, of her bright, beautiful spirit that deserved every opportunity in the world. My daughter, Marcus heard himself say. I have a daughter, Emma. She's 7, and she's brilliant, Mr. Ashford. She's going to do amazing things someday. But I'm a single father working at a lounge, and I'm terrified I won't be able to give her the future she deserves. Richard listened, really listened, his full attention on every word. When Marcus finished, he nodded slowly. Tell me about her, Richard said. Tell me everything. And Marcus did. He talked about how Emma's mother had left when she was 2 months old, unable to handle the reality of having a child with a man like Marcus. He talked about the stares they got in public, the cruel comments from strangers who assumed a dwarf couldn't possibly be a good father. He talked about Emma's first word, Dada, and how she'd never once seemed to notice that her father was different. To her, he was just Dad, her hero. He showed Richard pictures on his phone. Emma at her school play, dressed as a sunflower. Emma reading under a blanket fort they'd built together. Emma hugging Marcus, her small arms wrapped around his neck, both of them laughing at something now forgotten. Richard's eyes grew suspiciously bright as he looked at each photo. "She has your smile," he said quietly. "She has my everything," Marcus replied. "She's my whole world." Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he made a decision that Marcus could see forming in real time across his face. "I want to set up an education trust for Emma," Richard said. "Enough to cover her schooling from now through university, including medical school if that's what she chooses. No strings attached. It's yours, hers, regardless of anything else." Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical blow. "Mr. Ashford, I can't—" "You can, and you will." Richard's voice was firm but kind. "Because that little girl deserves the world, and you deserve to give it to her without breaking yourself in the process." He paused. "But I also want to offer you something else, a job, here, as my executive assistant." Marcus blinked, certain he'd misheard. "Your what?" "I know how it sounds, but hear me out." Richard sat back down, leaning forward earnestly. "That night, you showed more courage, more integrity, more quick thinking than most people I've encountered in my entire career. You put yourself in danger to help someone who, frankly, hadn't earned it. You problem-solved under pressure. You followed through when it would have been easier to walk away." He met Marcus's eyes. "Those are the qualities I need beside me. Not someone with an MBA who can barely look up from their phone. You, Marcus. I need someone like you. I don't have any experience. You have the right character. That's more rare and more valuable than any degree." Richard's voice softened. "I can teach you the business side. I can't teach someone to be decent, to be brave, to care about people. You already have that." Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Richard smiled, sad and genuine. "Because that night, you saw me at my worst and helped me anyway. You didn't judge. You didn't take advantage. You just helped. That's the kind of person I want in my life. That's the kind of person I want Emma to see leading by example." The salary Richard offered was more than triple what Marcus made at the lounge. The benefits included health insurance, dental, vision, things Marcus had only dreamed of providing for Emma. There would be flexibility for school events, for emergencies, for life. Marcus thought of Emma waiting at home, probably playing with her second-hand dolls or reading one of her library books. He thought of the future that had always seemed just out of reach, suddenly spreading before him like a path of light. "I accept," he whispered. Richard grinned, extending his hand again. "Welcome aboard, Marcus. This is going to be good. I promise you that." Marcus started the following Monday. The transition was jarring. From the dim lighting and late nights of the lounge to the bright, fast-paced world of corporate business. There were moments of doubt, times when he felt completely out of his depth. But Richard was patient, teaching him the systems, introducing him to key players, showing him the ropes with a kindness that never felt condescending. The other executives were another matter. Marcus felt their stares, heard their whispered comments. Some treated him like a charity case, Richard's good deed that would inevitably fail. Others ignored him entirely, as if pretending he didn't exist would make him disappear. But Marcus had spent his entire life being underestimated. He knew how to work harder, think smarter, prove himself through actions rather than words. He arrived early and stayed late. He took notes on everything, learning the business with the same dedication he'd brought to learning how to navigate a world not built for him. He asked questions without shame and implemented solutions that surprised even Richard. Within 3 months, he'd reorganized Richard's entire scheduling system, saving hours each week. He'd identified inefficiencies in communication between departments and proposed solutions that actually worked. He'd built relationships with everyone from the CEO to the janitors, learning names, remembering details, treating everyone with the same respect regardless of their position. He was good at his job. More than good. He was exceptional. But the real transformation came in Richard. Marcus watched as the man who'd been drowning in whiskey and regret began to surface, to breathe again. Richard started attending AA meetings regularly, and sometimes, late in the evening when most of the office had gone home, he'd talk to Marcus about the struggle, the daily choice to stay sober, the weight of past mistakes. "You remind me what's important," Richard said one night, both of them sitting in his office as the sun set over the city. "Purpose, connection, being someone worth being." "You were always worth being," Marcus replied gently. "Maybe, but I'd forgotten." Richard looked at him. "You and Emma, you remind me every day." Because Emma had become part of the story, too. Richard had asked to meet her, tentatively, nervously, as if afraid he might be overstepping. Marcus had hesitated, protective as any father would be. But something in Richard's eyes, a loneliness, a longing for family, made him agree. They'd met at the park on a Saturday morning. Emma had been shy at first, hiding behind Marcus's legs, peeking out at the tall man with the kind smile. But Richard had gotten down on one knee, bringing himself closer to her level, and asked her about the book she was carrying. "It's about space," Emma had said, her voice small but growing stronger. "Did you know that stars are really far away? Like, so far that their light takes years and years to reach us?" "I did know that," Richard had replied, his voice soft with wonder. "What else do you know about space?" And just like that, Emma had blossomed, launching into everything she'd learned about planets and galaxies and black holes. Richard had listened to every word, asking questions, encouraging her curiosity, seeing her brilliance the way Marcus always had. From that day forward, Richard became a fixture in their lives. Not replacing anything, Marcus was Emma's father, her entire universe, but adding something new, an uncle figure, a mentor, a friend. He came to Emma's school plays and cheered louder than anyone. He brought books about science and medicine, feeding her dreams. He taught her chess and let her win until she actually beat him fair and square, then celebrated her victory like it was an Olympic medal. He was present, and in being present, he healed. One evening, nearly a year after that rainy night in the alley, Richard invited Marcus and Emma to dinner at his penthouse. The same apartment where Marcus had once laid him on the couch and left water and aspirin, but now it felt different, lived in, warm, filled with light and laughter. After dinner, while Emma was engrossed in a nature documentary, Richard and Marcus stood by the windows looking out over the city. "I've been thinking," Richard said quietly, "about how we met, about how you saved my life that night. You would have been fine." "No." Richard's voice was firm. "I wouldn't have. Maybe not that night, but eventually. I was drowning, Marcus, and you threw me a lifeline. Not just in that alley, but every day since. You and Emma, you gave me a reason to be better, to do better." He turned to face Marcus, his eyes serious. "I want to set up something else. Not just the education trust for Emma, but a foundation. For families like yours. Single parents, especially those with disabilities, who are doing everything right, but can't get ahead because the system is rigged against them. I want to help change that." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Richard, I know it won't fix everything, but it's a start, and I want you to help me run it. Not as my assistant, but as co-director, equal partners in this." The magnitude of what Richard was offering washed over Marcus. Not just a job, but a mission. A way to take his own struggles and transform them into hope for others, to be the help he'd once needed but never received. "Why me?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. Richard smiled. "Because you see people, Marcus. Really see them. Their humanity, their worth, regardless of how they look or what they have. That's the rarest gift in the world. And it's exactly what this foundation needs." Marcus looked over at Emma, curled up on the couch, her eyes wide as she watched whales swimming across the screen. His daughter, his purpose. his heart walking around outside his body. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it." The Ashford Chen Foundation launched 6 months later. The hyphenated name had been Richard's insistence, despite Marcus's protests. "Equal partners," Richard had said firmly. "Your name carries as much weight as mine. More, actually, because you've lived what we're trying to fix." The foundation provided financial assistance, mentorship, and resources to single parents facing discrimination or hardship due to disabilities. They partnered with schools, hospitals, and community organizations. They funded research, changed policies, and most importantly, they changed lives. Marcus found himself speaking at events, telling his story not for pity but for power. The power to inspire others, to show them that circumstances don't define destiny. He talked about the night he saved Richard, yes, but more about all the nights before that. The nights he'd struggled to make rent. The nights he'd cried in the shower, terrified he wasn't enough for Emma. The nights he'd lain awake, wondering if his daughter would grow up ashamed of him, and he talked about the nights after. The nights filled with hope. The nights where he tucked Emma into bed in their new apartment. Not a penthouse, but comfortable, safe, theirs, and knew that her future was secure. The nights where he felt proud not just of what he'd overcome, but of who he'd become. Emma grew. She turned 8, then 9, then 10. She joined the science club at school and won the regional science fair with a project about prosthetics. When asked where she got her inspiration, she'd looked straight at the camera and said, "My dad taught me that being different doesn't mean being less. It means being exactly who you're supposed to be." Marcus had cried watching that video. So had Richard. On the 3-year anniversary of that rainy night, Richard invited Marcus to his office. The same office where they'd had that first real conversation. But now, instead of sitting across from each other, they sat side by side, partners in every sense of the word. "I got my 2-year chip last week," Richard said, pulling the small token from his pocket. 2 years sober. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said, meaning every word. "I couldn't have done it without you, without Emma. You gave me a reason to want to be sober, to be present, to be worthy of the second chance you gave me." Richard turned to look at him. "I never thanked you properly for that night, for seeing me at my absolute worst and choosing kindness anyway." "You've thanked me every day," Marcus replied softly. "Through everything you've done, everything you've become. Through the foundation, through being there for Emma, through being my friend." He smiled. "You didn't need saving that night, Richard. You just needed someone to believe you were worth saving." "We saved each other," Richard said. "That's the truth of it." And it was. Because that rainy night had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Marcus had found not just financial security, but purpose, community, and family. Richard had found sobriety, meaning, and a reason to be the man he'd always wanted to be. But more than that, they'd found each other, a friendship forged in the worst of circumstances and strengthened by mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love. They'd become family, not by blood but by choice. And that, Marcus had learned, was sometimes the strongest bond of all. The foundation continued to grow, helping hundreds of families find their footing, their hope, their way forward. Every success story was a testament to what was possible when someone looked past the surface and saw the person beneath, when someone chose kindness over judgment, action over apathy, connection over convenience. Emma, now 12, understood the significance of that night in ways she hadn't when she was 7. She'd ask her father to tell the story sometimes, especially when she faced her own moments of doubt or difficulty. "You were scared, right?" she'd ask. "When you saw those men?" "Terrified," Marcus would admit. "But you helped anyway." Because sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing the right thing anyway. Emma would nod, absorbing this wisdom, adding it to her own growing understanding of the world. And Marcus knew that the greatest gift he'd ever given his daughter wasn't the education trust or the secure future. It was the example of who to be, how to treat people, why character mattered more than appearance, actions more than words. One evening, as they sat together at dinner, Marcus, Emma, and Richard, who'd become so integral to their lives that his weekly presence was simply expected, Emma asked a question that stopped both men in their tracks. "Uncle Richard, what would have happened if Dad hadn't helped you that night?" The room fell silent. Richard set down his fork slowly, considering his answer with the seriousness Emma's question deserved. "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I would have figured it out eventually. Or maybe I wouldn't have. Maybe I'd still be drinking, still be lost, still be alone." He looked at Marcus, his eyes bright. "But I do know this. I wouldn't have found the two of you. I wouldn't have this." He gestured around the table at their little makeshift family. "And that would have been the real tragedy." Emma nodded solemnly. Then, with the straightforwardness of a child, she asked, "Are you glad my dad is short?" "Emma," Marcus started to interject, but Richard held up a hand, smiling. "You know what? I am. Because your dad's size means he's spent his whole life seeing things from a different perspective. He notices things others miss. He understands what it's like to be underestimated, dismissed, judged. And that understanding made him the kind of person who'd stop in a dark alley to help a drunk stranger." Richard's voice grew thick with emotion. "Your dad's size is part of what makes him exactly who he is. The best man I've ever known. So yes, Emma, I'm glad. Because anything different, and he wouldn't be him." Emma beamed, and Marcus had to look away, blinking rapidly. Even after all this time, moments like this still caught him off guard. The acceptance, the love, the family he'd built, not despite his differences, but with them as part of the foundation. As the years continued to pass, the impact of that one night rippled outward in ways none of them could have predicted. The foundation helped a single father with cerebral palsy launch his own business. It provided scholarships to dozens of children whose parents were disabled. It funded adaptive programs in schools across the state. It changed legislation. It shifted perspectives. It proved over and over that when you invest in people, really invest, not just financially but emotionally and spiritually, the returns are immeasurable. Marcus eventually wrote a book about his journey, though he was hesitant at first. But Richard convinced him that his story needed to be told, not for ego, but for the single parents lying awake at night, terrified and alone, needing to know that dawn was coming. The book became a bestseller, not because it was sensational, but because it was true, raw and honest and hopeful. Marcus traveled to speak at conferences, schools, and community centers. Everywhere he went, people approached him afterward with tears in their eyes, thanking him for putting words to their own struggles, for showing them they weren't alone. And always, Emma was there, growing taller than her father by the time she turned 13, but never looking down on him, developing her own dreams while holding tight to the values he'd instilled. Learning that strength comes in all sizes, that love knows no limits, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show up for someone in their darkest hour. When Emma turned 16, the foundation held its annual gala. It had become one of the city's premier charity events, raising millions each year. Marcus and Richard stood together on stage, looking out over the crowd of donors, recipients, and supporters. 5 years ago, Richard began, I was saved by a man who had every reason to walk past me. I was at my lowest point, and he showed me that humanity still existed, that kindness wasn't dead, that I was worth saving. He gestured to Marcus. But here's what I didn't know that night. I wasn't just being saved. I was being given the greatest gift of my life, the chance to be better, to do better, to matter. Marcus took the microphone, his voice steady despite the emotion churning inside him. I've learned that we're not defined by our worst moments or our circumstances. We're defined by how we treat each other in those moments, by whether we choose to see the humanity in everyone, regardless of how they look, where they come from, or what they're struggling with. He found Emma in the crowd, her eyes shining with pride. My daughter teaches me this every day, and so does my friend Richard. We're all just walking each other home. The question is whether we're willing to stop and help when someone stumbles. The applause was thunderous. But more than that, it was heartfelt. Because everyone in that room had been touched by what Marcus and Richard had built. By the ripple effects of one man choosing kindness on a rainy Thursday night. Later that evening, as the gala wound down, the three of them stood together on the balcony, Marcus, Richard, and Emma. The city sparkled beneath them, millions of lights representing millions of lives, each one a story, each one containing their own struggles and triumphs. I was thinking, Emma said, breaking the comfortable silence, about that night, about how one decision changed everything. She looked at her father. You always tell me to be brave, to do the right thing even when it's hard. That night you showed me what that meant. You weren't even there, Marcus said gently. But it shaped my whole life. Because you did that, I have Uncle Richard. I have the foundation. I have security and opportunity and hope. She smiled. And more than that, I have proof that being good matters, that being kind matters, that one person can make a difference. Richard cleared his throat roughly. You know what the craziest part is? I went out that night planning to drown my sorrows, to give up. I'd lost my marriage, my direction, my will to keep fighting. He looked at Marcus. And then this man, this incredible, brave, impossibly good man, decided I was worth saving. Even though I was a mess. Even though helping me could have gotten him hurt. He decided my life mattered. It did, Marcus said simply. It does. Because of you, I believe that now. Richard's voice cracked. You gave me the greatest gift anyone's ever given me. You gave me a reason to live, and not just to live, but to live well, to mean something, to be someone Emma can call uncle and mean it. Emma stepped between them, putting an arm around each. At 16, she was taller than both, but in that moment, she was still their little girl. We're a family, she said firmly. Maybe not traditional, maybe not what anyone expected, but we're real, and we're good, and we're enough. Standing there together, the three of them looking out over the city, Marcus felt a peace he'd never known before. The journey had been long and hard. There had been moments of doubt, of fear, of exhaustion. But standing here now with his daughter on one side and his best friend on the other, he knew every struggle had been worth it. That rainy night had changed everything. But not because Marcus had saved Richard from trouble, because he'd shown him something more valuable than safety. He'd shown him that he mattered, that someone cared, that he wasn't alone. And in doing so, Marcus had saved himself too. From a life of limitation, of just getting by, of wondering if his daughter would have the opportunities she deserved. He'd built something bigger than survival. He'd built a legacy. The foundation would continue long after they were gone, helping generation after generation of families find their footing. The ripples would continue spreading outward, touching lives they'd never meet, changing futures they'd never see. All because one man chose kindness in a dark alley on a rainy night. As they stood together under the stars, Marcus thought about all the people who'd underestimated him over the years, who'd seen his size and assumed his worth, who'd looked at him and seen only limitation. He'd spent so much of his life trying to prove them wrong, to show them he was capable, valuable, enough. But somewhere along the way, he'd stopped needing their validation. Because he had Emma's love, Richard's friendship, the families they'd helped, and the lives they'd changed. He had proof, tangible and real, that his life mattered, that he'd made a difference, that being small in stature meant nothing compared to being enormous in heart. "Dad?" Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Yeah, sweetheart? Thank you. For everything. For being you. For teaching me what really matters. For showing me that being different is a gift, not a curse." She squeezed his shoulder. "You're my hero. You know that, right?" Marcus's vision blurred with tears. "You're mine too, Em. You always have been." Richard wiped at his own eyes unashamedly. "I love you both," he said, his voice thick. "My family, my purpose, my redemption." They stood together as the city breathed beneath them, three people whose lives had intersected in the most unlikely way, creating something beautiful from something broken, proving that sometimes the moments that change everything start with one person deciding that another person's life matters. That they're worth stopping for, worth helping, worth saving. And in saving someone else, we often save ourselves. If this story touched your heart, please share with us in the comments where you're watching from. Tell us what moved you most in this journey. Your opinion means everything to us. And don't forget to like the video, because it helps us continue bringing stories like this to you. Stories about real people, real struggles, and the transformative power of kindness. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. And remember, you never know when your one act of kindness might change everything.